everybody. We have a great talk ahead. Prasanna here from Snowflake is going to be speaking to us. Prasanna is the Director of Product Management at Snowflake, and is going to be talking to us just about her really cool work that she's got going on there, and I'll let you kick it off.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you, so I think you're okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we can get started. Okay. Right, you see my screen now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of businesses wanting to share and collaborate data, and how can you really increase business value, drive insights, and decisions through data and collaboration around data in real time. I'm Director of Product Management at Snowflake. Snowflake is a cloud data company. We started as a cloud data warehouse that was built for the cloud, and our focus now is on building the data cloud to allow businesses to collaborate and drive insights from data without silos. So I'll jump right in. As we all know, there is an explosion in data that to businesses, and along with this increase in data, new technology for using data, including the cloud, really changes how we're using data today. First, everyone is becoming a data scientist, is how I like to think of it. Function is becoming data-driven, and so analytics is becoming increasingly important for every business and in every function. Along with this, machine learning is being applied increasingly, whether it is for making product recommendations or identifying customer churn. And machine learning, I think of it as really depending and needing data. And so if you think about machine learning code, similar to humans have nature and nurture. Our nature is the genes we're born with, and our nurture is the environment we grew up in. And for machine learning, the code itself is nature, but data is the nurture. And so businesses need data to test, validate, and apply machine learning models. At the same time, there's also an explosion of data. So there's increasing amounts of data being generated from IoT devices, mobile devices, the web, and social media. And this opens up the opportunity for using this explosion of data to drive insights. And finally, with the rise of the cloud, this data is becoming more and more available for people to access and share. And therefore, for all of these reasons, data is increasingly becoming more important than ever. And the crisis that the world finds itself in with the COVID-19 pandemic is a great example of where we need to share and collaborate and rely on data to make better decisions. And so data is becoming the new oil, which is a phrase you've heard. So given the increasing access and importance of data in business decision-making, let's look at sort of what businesses are doing in collaborating around data, because a lot of the business insight that you want to drive, it comes not only from data that is available within your own four walls, but also data that is available outside your four walls, whether it's from suppliers and partners or data that's available for you to access openly, or data that is available for you to buy. So we see strategies in how businesses are collaborating around data. The first strategy is really within a company. Access to data is increasingly becoming democratized, and so you need different business units and functional areas to be able to find and access data within the company. So it could be across different geographies or across different business units that you want to enable people to more easily find data that helps them do their job and be able to access this data. The second strategy that we see businesses leveraging is really a cross-company strategy. Business is inherently very, business is inherently collaborative, right? You seldom do business in a silo. You're working with partners and customers and suppliers. And so being able to make data available to a marketing vendor who can then use that to host an event and then share data back with you on how your event did is part of doing business. And so cross-company is obviously critical. The third strategy is what I call super consumers. And this is really applicable in any industry. So in financial services and that are sourced from thousands of different external sources of data in order to make their investment decisions. But this is also true in other industries. So a company that is, for example, we had Cisco, who's a customer, talk about this. They really want data to be shared between them and their suppliers, and they have hundreds of suppliers, and they really want to be able to collaborate and share data with each supplier to better inform their supply chain and their operations. And so this is one where there is a big consumer like Cisco and hundreds of suppliers that are each collaborating with the super consumer in sort of a hub and spoke model. And the reverse of that is also something we see, which I call super providers, and really a company that might be a SaaS company that has thousands of customers and wants to make data available to these customers. And it could be raw data or it could be insights on the data. So for example, a company we work with is a company called Braze, who powers email and push campaigns, marketing campaigns for their customers. So their customers use Braze to run a marketing campaign, such as an email campaign, and they want to then understand how did their email campaign do? Who were the users who clicked on the email, who opened it, and they want all of this data so that they can then combine it with their own internal data to be able to say that the email campaign resulted in an increase of $100,000 in sales because of people that clicked on the email and bought something. To be able to do this, Braze's customers need the data from Braze, but each customer needs data on their own campaigns and sometimes also insights on this, such as what was the open rate, how did it compare to other campaigns, and so on. So being able to share data from your company, if you were Braze, to hundreds or thousands of customers is another important way in which you want to distribute data. I'll pause here. So these are kind of the 4 big strategies that we see in businesses leveraging and collaborating data, and obviously many of them overlap. So you would have collaboration of data internal to your company. That is the first strategy, but you often also want to distribute data to your customers. That's the 4th strategy, and so these really all come together as well. I'll pause here before I keep going to see if there are any questions to make this more interactive.
I'll keep an eye here on the questions as well. I haven't seen any in the chat yet, but if anybody has any, now's a great time.
Okay.
Otherwise, if you like, let me know if you want me to interrupt you as they come up too.
Yeah, that's totally fine too. That makes it more interactive, and it's right after lunch, and I'm sure it's been a long day. Yeah, and in terms of time, just wanted to make sure, Renee, what should I plan for before stopping for questions?
Sure, yeah, so it's a 40-minute session. This one goes until 3:25. So feel free to leave as much time as you'd like at the end for questions. Yeah.
Okay, sounds great. And again, if you see questions pop up, please feel free to interrupt me. I'm in another window, so I'm not able to see the questions.
No problem. Yes, please, so people feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll share them.
Thank you. All right. So clearly there is an increasing need for businesses to collaborate around data and then be able to find the data and combine it with data that they have within their own 4 walls. But there are also some challenges that you run into today as a business if you're trying to share and collaborate around data. So the first challenge is that if you think about how you share data, you probably do one of 2 things. You either have to send around a file. Let's say you want to get data to a supplier or a vendor that you work with. You probably have to email them a file, or you have to put a file in an FTP bucket. And when this file is really data, it means that both parties have to do an ETL process. So you, as a sender of that file, have to extract data from your databases, put it into a file, send it to the vendor. The vendor needs to do the reverse transformation, take the file, extract it into a database. And so they have to set up an ETL pipeline and manage that pipeline in order to be able to use that data, which is costly for both parties and is painful to maintain those pipelines. The second method is, instead of sending a file, you could build an API that somebody calls to get your data. But this is, again, expensive for both parties because you have to build and maintain this API, which requires significant engineering investment. And the other party also needs engineering investment to call the API. And also, APIs are not very good at sharing large volumes of data because they tend to, you need to deal with throttling and so on. And the other important problem is that with files, the moment you put data into the file, it's already stale. And so if this is data such as web traffic data, or something that's changing every second, every minute, you have to deal with data being delayed. So the moment you put it in a file, it's stale, and now you have to keep doing this once a day. It's also error prone. And most importantly, sending data around in files is not very secure because once you send it out as a file, you don't have very much control over it. So that's the problems with the two traditional ways of sharing data, which is either sending around files or building and maintaining and calling APIs, which makes it painful to get access to the data. But there's two other problems beyond just the fact that getting access to the data itself is painful. There is a second problem, which is how do you discover what data is out there, which is valuable, which is worth your time? How do you discover data that is certified, and how can you find out who else uses it and how you can use it yourself? So data discovery is a challenge. So finding the data is also a huge challenge. And a lot of this tends to be ad hoc. You have to sort of do web searches or go to conferences to try to find data that might be valuable. And the third important challenge is with the increasing privacy regulation, whether it's GDPR or CCPA, being compliant with these privacy and security laws while also being able to share data becomes a challenge. And of course, data privacy and security are important. It's even more important when you are sharing data with somebody else. And so if the data has email addresses, for example, you need to be able to take that out or really mask it before somebody can get access to that data. So those are the three primary challenges that businesses face, even though there is tremendous value in sharing and collaborating data outside your own four walls. The challenges are that giving access to this data is painful, sending it on files and APIs. The second challenge is data discovery is hard. And finally, being able to share data in a secure, privacy-compliant way becomes a challenge.
Question for you here.
So I'd like to talk a little.
Well, the question here is, what are the challenges specific to sharing business-to-business data?
Yeah, great question. So the challenges that I discussed here are all primarily B2B, even for B2B data, because if you think about the use cases I was talking about, a company sharing data with its suppliers or a company sharing data with its customers, it could be a B2B SaaS company. In all of these cases, you have the same problems. Sharing data is hard because you have to send around files, set up file buckets, and discovering it is hard. And then, compliance is equally important, even if it's two businesses sharing data, because that data might itself have data residency requirements or other privacy requirements. Riju, did that answer your question? So most of the challenges I'm talking about are almost all B2B focused. Okay. So let's look a little bit at how we could try to address these challenges. So the first is at Snowflake, what we do with our data sharing capability is really try to first solve the first problem, which is getting access to data is painful. And so we think of data sharing in Snowflake as a way to share data that replaces the two traditional ways in which you as a provider of data would share data with consumers, which is files or APIs. Instead of sending around a file or building an API that somebody needs to call, with data sharing in Snowflake, you put data in your Snowflake account, and then you create a Snowflake construct called a share, where you decide what objects within your Snowflake database, and a database could contain tables, views, even functions that you want to share with another party, let's say with a vendor that you work with. So what you do is you decide what tables or views you want to share with your vendor, you create a share, you add the objects that you want to share, and then you choose the companies that you want to share it with. And the important piece here is that as a provider of data, the data never leaves your account. So you are able to share the data without having to make a copy of it. On the consumer side, the first thing that the consumers do when they see that they have a share from you is they create a virtual database from that share. And that virtual database is virtual because it's a database that's actually pointing to the original data in your account. And so for the consumer, this gives them data that's already ready to be used and queried. So it's already in the form of tables and views. And what's important is that this is live. So as new data lands, for example, if it's web event data, as new data is landing in your account as the provider, your marketing vendor in this example is able to immediately see the latest updates and immediately start querying it without having to set up an ETL pipeline. And finally, all of this is global in that the provider and the consumer could be on different clouds and different regions and be able to access this data. And you as a provider also have control over this data. You can revoke access to it at any point, and you can also enforce security policies on it. And finally, the consumers pay for the queries that they're doing on the data, and then you as a provider pay for the storage of the data. So consumers don't need to keep copies in their account or pay for the storage, and you as a provider would not need to pay for the consumers running queries on the account. So that solves the first problem, which makes it easier to give access to data. The second problem is, how do I discover what data is out there? For example, if I'm trying to do an analysis of how weather is impacting store sales, how do I find that weather data? Today, I would have to find a weather vendor and call them up and ask them how much it costs and have them send me a file. So this solves the problem of them sending me a file, but how do I find the weather vendor? And so to solve that discovery problem, we have the data marketplace, which builds on top of data sharing and kind of really lists data that's available from other customers on Snowflake that you can then immediately click and get access to through data sharing. So you don't have to, again, get a file or ETL it in. You can immediately start querying it. And you can also have data here that is personalized, meaning there might be a company you work with who's running your marketing campaigns like Braze, or who's powering your web analytics like Heap. And you can get access to your own slice of data from that company by clicking on that listing and accessing the share. And Braze or Heap can set it up so that each of their customers only sees the data that pertains to that customer. And so we have data across a variety of different categories. So that solves the discovery problem, along with the data exchange, which allows customers to create their own internal marketplaces or hubs to allow their internal business units or specific functional areas to be able to collaborate, publish data, make it discoverable for others, and control access to it, while still getting the benefits that the data is live and not moved or copied around. And finally, to solve the third problem, which is how do I ensure privacy and security laws around sharing data, Snowflake has a variety of tools available in the toolkit that you can use, which become increasingly important when sharing data. The first is you can choose to share views. So these are database views that are secure views. So you cannot reverse engineer the underlying data, and you also can control what columns you want to share. So you don't have to share all the columns or all the rows in your table. You can share only a specific view of it. You can also share functions, so you can let people get answers to questions without giving them the underlying data. So a good example might be if you work with a partner who needs to be able to see what products are frequently bought with a specific product. So let's say you're a retailer and you want to allow a partner to understand what do people frequently buy along with gardening gloves. You can let them ask that question without giving them access to the underlying actual purchases or actual transactions that are happening. And so you can do this by creating a function that they can call, and you can have them get an answer to that question and just be able to see what products were frequently bought with gardening gloves without revealing all of the actual purchases that happened. You can also take this a step further and do secure joins where both parties can join their data without either party revealing any personally identifiable information. So for example, if two companies wanted to see who the overlapping users are in their user list, but you don't want to give out your entire user list, you could do a secure join through a clean room type of capability that still preserves each party's private data. And then finally, you can also lock down certain columns or certain rows, and we call this dynamic data masking. So you can set policies. So whenever you share data, you can say that anybody outside your company who's accessing this data through a share should never be able to see certain columns. They should, or certain columns like, let's say, zip code, should be masked. And so they'll only see the first digit or the last digit or whatever you specify. And so all of these tools let you enforce security and governance. Another important control that you also get, because the data is shared live, is you as a provider of the data can audit how the data is being used. So you can get metrics around how your consumers are using the data. And this becomes particularly important in the Snowflake data marketplace, where we have providers that are sellers of data. And they want to understand how customers are using their data without, of course, revealing exactly what they're doing with the data, but really being able to see how often are they querying it, and getting access to that kind of usage metrics is really beneficial. And that's something that you cannot do with files, because if you as a provider send over a file, you have no idea whether the consumers are using that file or how often they're using it. And so being able to get visibility into how your data is being used allows you to audit it, allows you to also price it and potentially charge for it. And so all of these together allow us to now build a marketplace where companies can actually derive value from their data by also being able to monetize and charge for the data, even if you aren't in the business of being a data seller. The other interesting opportunity that we see opening up is companies that might have really meaningful insights that they can offer on data. So as an example, there's a company that has, let's say, a really good ML model to assess financial risk by looking at data that's available on the web. A bank could use such a data service from a company like Quantifying to be able to share the bank's, let's say, applicants for a loan, and then have Quantifying enrich that with a risk score that uses Quantifying's ML models and data to identify a potential fraud risk score for each of these applicants and be able to share that back with the bank. So that's an example where we go beyond just data to being able to provide models and insights around data. And finally, in closing, as we open up these walls and allow businesses to share data and insights around data, it turns into one big connected network, which allows all companies to drive greater value from their data, as well as to drive greater business insights from using data and data services on their data.
A few questions for you here now.
Perfect. From a vendor perspective, so I'll read the question from Brian. From a vendor perspective, is it easier to expose the data for us to access a client's data lake as opposed to exposing an API? On the other side, how complicated is it to funnel back the data that a vendor collects into a client's data lake after going through governance? Yeah, it's a good question. And the so let's talk about the first half, which is from a vendor perspective. If you're working with a vendor, and Brian, correct me if I got your question wrong, but if you're working with, your question is if you're working with a vendor and you want to expose data, you want to expose a data lake, or do you want to access the vendor's data lake? And the idea is that with this kind of data sharing capability, you would be able to do that by just creating this package called a share, which is a couple of SQL queries, instead of having to build and host a REST API server that somebody would need to call. And same thing on the other side, if the vendor wanted to funnel data back, and yeah, so I saw your clarification to have a vendor be able to access a limited data set. That's exactly right. And so, if you wanted a vendor to be able to access, let's say, just the names of companies that attended an event that you hosted, you will be able to create a view that has just got those columns, and it's just a couple of SQL queries to share that data with, and then the vendor will be able to start using it. So that's the idea. And if they want to do the same back, maybe enrich that data and share it back with you, they could do the same. And because both sides get to control what they're sharing, it's governed, and you only are exposing the specific objects that you're choosing to expose. Did that answer your question, Brian? Okay, I'll wait for Brian to reply. Okay, thank you, Brian. I'll move into Riju's second question, which is, are companies that are sharing this data on Snowflake monetizing it? That's a great question. Today, the companies that are sharing this data, many of them are monetizing it. And so if I go back to some examples, so we have some companies here. For example, we have S&P, who's a provider of data, a very large provider of data in the financial industry. And they do monetize it. And even for existing customers who they have existing contracts with, they are delivering data through data sharing instead of delivering them files, which means a better experience for S&P's customer. It also means significant cost savings for S&P because they don't have to maintain those pipelines. And for the customer is getting data that's already ready to be queried. And so it's a much better customer experience. So that's an example where it's turning into bottom line impact. But to answer your question about top line, we also have businesses that are getting new leads through this and driving top line that way. And today, many of them are monetizing it directly. So they sign a contract directly with the customer who clicks in from here and, let's say, wants to buy weather data. But we're also working on supporting the ability for a business to just have that collection happen through Snowflake and get paid out. So that, let's say you have let's say you're a retail company and you have some really interesting data that you want to anonymize and list on the marketplace, you will soon be able to charge a price for it. And let's say a hedge fund wants to buy this data and use it, they'll be able to try it and then buy it and then pay, and you get paid as the provider of the data. So that's where we want to go, but there are businesses monetizing this today. Krishnan had a question on, is this, yeah, thank you, Riju. I'm glad that was helpful. Kristen had a question on, is this like giving access to a SQL server with read-only access? That is exactly a good analogy. And the reason that it's almost exactly like that, and the reason it's possible with Snowflake is because of the architecture, which allows us to separate storage and compute. And so the data is stored in one customer's account, but is queryable by anyone that they want to share that data with. So yeah, so it's similar, and so so to answer Kristen's question, it's similar, and the recipient of the consumer is getting a read-only view into this data. But the important piece is that that consumer is paying for their own queries, so you're not creating an account and paying for the usage, and the consumer is also able to just be on any cloud or any region that they choose to be on. Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Riju had another question about what is the incentive for businesses to share their data. That's again a great question. I think the incentives are really, at the end of the day, either top line or bottom line oriented. So the top line reason for sharing data is being able to drive a new revenue stream. And so even a company like Braze, which is Braze or Heap, which is in the business of providing a SaaS product, could now drive a new revenue stream by making that data available through the marketplace. And so that was, the reason for sharing data there was really to drive a new revenue stream and to really drive top line. The other reason to share is also to save costs compared to maintaining files and maintaining APIs. Data sharing allows businesses to share data at a much lower cost, and so that is the other reason why some businesses have an incentive to share data this way. And then there is also internally, as businesses derive value from their data, Snowflake also does a rebate where if the provider has a Snowflake bill, they actually get a discount or a rebate off of their Snowflake bill as consumers query their data. And we call that just a rebate to help providers offset some of their bill as more and more consumers use their data. So that's just another sweetener as well. Did that answer your question, Riju? Okay, thanks. Let me move down to Divya's question, which is what kind of governance structure is required for this implementation? It's a great question, and Divya, let me know if I didn't read it right. So really, at the end of the day, there's a business level of governance that you would. Okay, I think Divya clarified. How do you manage or provide access? Provide a catalog of what data you're making available through sharing. Got it. Okay, that clarifies it for me. So first, in terms of how do you manage and provide access, you only choose to share data with specific parties that you decide to share it with. So you could decide you don't want to have any data available on the marketplace for discovery. You just want to share data with a specific set of companies that you work with, maybe their suppliers or partners. So you share data with those specific companies' Snowflake accounts, and so it's almost like it's almost like you're sharing with chosen accounts, and so you would choose those companies and only share with them. So that's the first piece, and only they have access to the data. So you would enter their Snowflake account names, and that's how you decide to give them access. And then you also can revoke access. So just like you can add consumers on a share with a single step, you can also remove them from the share, which means they can no longer have access now to that data. And so that allows you to control and revoke access as needed. And then, as I said, in addition to controlling who you share with, you can also control what you share. So you can choose what tables and columns you're allowed to share, or what rows and create views. And you can also audit how they're using it. And so that provides you an additional level of governance and control. And then for the catalog, if you want to make, depending on how you want this data to be discoverable, you could have a catalog, to use your term, you could create a catalog that says, here are the data products that are available within just my company. And so this is an example of the data exchange I was talking about, where within a company, a business can choose to make certain data sets available to people within the company. And so they publish data. So there's a notion of publishing to this data exchange. So a provider of data or even a provider of a risk model, as in my example here, can choose to publish that as a listing to the company's exchange. And then everybody who's a member of this exchange is the only people that will be able to see this listing. And so in the case of an internal data exchange for this company buyer, it's only the people that are at this company who are members of this exchange that will be able to then go and discover the published listings. So that is one discovery capability. If you do indeed want to make your data discoverable by a wider group of people, because you want to say monetize your data, then you could publish it to the marketplace. And so it looks like a very similar tile, but it gets published to the Snowflake marketplace, and then you make it discoverable by a wider group of people, while still being able to control who can then get access to it when they click on it. Did that answer your question? Yeah, thank you, Divya. I know we only have 3 minutes, so I'll try to go through the next 2 questions quickly. Laurel had a question. Is there a way to play with Snowflake to convince your company to use it, or just to build your marketable skills on this platform? Great question, Laurel. There is. So if you actually just go to snowflake.com, you can sign up because it's a completely SaaS product, and one of our big focuses is on making sure it's really simple and easy to use. So you can just sign up for a free account, and it actually comes with 300 or 400 free credits of Snowflake. So you can go ahead and play with it. You can also go to the marketplace. So the moment you open a free account, the first thing you want to do is get some data to play with. And so if you go to the data marketplace, which is available within your account, you will be able to immediately get access to several listings out there that are free. So there are some free weather listings. They're still live and accurate, and they're not kind of stale data. They're still live, but they are available immediately for you to start querying and using. And for the provider of the data, it's a good way to do a try before you buy. And there are also open data sets that are available there, like COVID data, which has been very popular right now, obviously, because businesses are trying to see the impact of COVID. So we have the Johns Hopkins COVID data and other data that's available. Falguni had a question. Does Snowflake allow creating analytics out of the data, or is it just accessing the data? Yeah, you can definitely create analytics. So the data is being shared. So let's say a provider shares data with you. The data they're making available to you is ultimately, it could be tables or columns, or tables or views. They could also make available certain functions that you get to call against your own data. And then likewise, you as a consumer can take that data. Let's say it's weather data that Weather Source is making available to you through a share. You can run analytics on that weather data. You can join it with sales by store, but you can also build ML models that leverage this weather data. And if you choose, you want to make your derived data set or your model available to others, you can publish it as well. So it's a really sort of rich graph that you can build. Awesome. Thank you all for all of your questions. Those are all great questions. Thanks for taking the time. I think we're right at time. So I think this was perfect timing. I'm glad you found this useful, and very much look forward to the other sessions.
Thank you so much. This was an excellent talk. Thank you for your time and for answering everybody's questions.
Thank you all.